It's been 3 years since we ranked the 50 states, and a lot's changed. So let's update the list based on each state's economy, safety, cost of living, schools, climate, and quality of life. And this time we're including the 5 populated territories, because even though you probably forgot about them, they're still America, and their people are still Americans. Well, except number 55, American Samoa. American Samoa is the only part of the US south of the equator, and the only part of the US without birthright citizenship. But even if American Samoans became US citizens, that wouldn't fix much, because with a 10% unemployment rate, 55% poverty rate, and extreme isolation with a 6-hour flight from Honolulu being the only way to get here, American Samoa isn't even the best Samoa. Number 54. The Northern Mariana Islands. Most of you probably didn't know the Northern Mariana Islands were a US territory, and 99% of you couldn't locate them on a map. But apart from being cheap and beautiful, there's little reason to live here. Well, unless you're from China and want your kid to be a US citizen, because it's the only place in the US where people from China don't need a visa to visit. Number 53. Mississippi. Mississippi is similar in size to Bangladesh, and its overall quality of life is similar too. Okay, it's obviously not that bad, but Mississippi has the worst wages, highest poverty, and lowest life expectancy of any state at only 74.4 years. The average life expectancy in Bangladesh is 75 years. Number 52. Louisiana. Louisiana ranks so poorly in literally every statistic that it almost seems deliberate. And considering it has by far the most corrupt state government, it might be. Because Louisiana's natural disasters pale in comparison to its man-made disasters, such as the worst pollution levels and economic opportunity, second highest crime and poverty rates, and second worst infrastructure. Number 51. Puerto Rico. What? A territory has a higher quality of life than a state? Well, it depends. If you're coming from the mainland, know Spanish, and have a remote job, Puerto Rico's great. It's stupidly beautiful, the food's delicious, and the life expectancy is higher than any state. Not to mention, it's dirt cheap and you'll pay just 4% in income tax. But if you're from the island and just trying to find a job in the struggling economy, the $24,000 median income and 41% poverty rate aren't. Number 50. Arkansas. Arkansas contains the only diamond producing mine in the US, but it's obvious the residents aren't benefiting from it, as the land of opportunity has practically no opportunity with the third worst wages, healthcare, and violent crime rate. Number 49. New Mexico. New Mexico has more PhDs per capita than any other state, but most of them moved here because the only thing the worst public schooling system is producing is criminals. Yeah, New Mexico is by far the most dangerous state. Number 48. The US Virgin Islands. The US Virgin Islands have water so clear and beaches so pristine that you'd think Mother Nature photoshopped them herself. But paradise usually comes with a price, and the price of shipping is why, despite being the only US territory that drives on the left side of the road, most cars were designed for driving on the right. St. John is also exorbitantly expensive. St. Thomas sees millions of cruise ship passengers, and while St. Croix is considered a bargain, the median home cost is still $400,000. Number 47. West Virginia. Compared to the Virgin Islands, West Virginians are rich. Compared to any state other than Mississippi, West Virginians are poor. And when it comes to taking care of themselves, West Virginians don't know how. With the highest obesity, smoking, depression, and drug overdose rates, the worst healthcare and infrastructure, and the least educated populace. No wonder the average life expectancy is lower than Syria's. Number 46. Kentucky. If West Virginia didn't exist, Kentucky would be the unhealthiest state. Not only does it have the most KFCs per capita, the second highest obesity, smoking, and depression rates, and the largest amount of inbreeding of any state, Kentuckians are also the least physically active Americans, with 1/3 of adults never exercising outside of work. Number 45. Alabama. If the states were students, Alabama would have peaked in middle school. I mean, they built the first rocket that put men on the moon, and it's been downhill ever since. But to be fair, of all the states that suck, Alabama has improved the most. What was routinely one of the worst 2 states just 5 years ago, now isn't even in the bottom 10. Well, when we include the territories. Number 44, South Carolina. South Carolina was the fastest growing state in 2023. And I don't know why. The schools blow, crime is rampant, and outside of Charleston, there are no good paying jobs. And sure, there's nice beaches, but Alabama beaches are cheaper, warmer, and safer. Number 43. Oklahoma. Considering that per square mile, Oklahoma has had more tornadoes than any other place on Earth, including the highest ever recorded wind speed at 318 miles an hour, it's a miracle anything here is still standing. So how the heck is the infrastructure actually good? Well, because the government doesn't fund anything else with the second worst schools, third worst healthcare, and eighth highest poverty. Number 42, Guam. What's clearly the best territory to live in would still be one of the worst 10 states. I guess it just goes to show how much of a boost a place's economy and infrastructure get upon statehood. But while it is very, very, very isolated, like literally farther from Hawaii than Hawaii is from the mainland, with lush jungles, colorful coral reefs, and rich history, Guam is one of the most geographically unique and culturally diverse parts of America. And due to its strong military presence and tourism from Asia, the economy is incredible for a territory. Just keep in mind that the humidity here makes Florida seem dry. Number 41. Tennessee. If it weren't for Nashville's thriving economy, Tennessee would have certainly been in the bottom 5. Because the median home cost of $310,000 is far too expensive for a state with the 5th worst healthcare, 5th highest violent crime and corruption rates, and 5th lowest life expectancy. Oh, and with a murder rate 7 times the national average, Memphis is America's most dangerous city, and it ain't even close. Now, those were the 15 worst states and territories, and before we get to the other 40, leave a like and subscribe. If we hit 10,000 likes, I'll make a video ranking all 35 countries in the Americas from worst to best. And although it's neither a state or territory, we're gonna give an honorable mention to Washington, D.C., which would be right here on the list. Because although D.C. would be the healthiest state with by far the highest salaries, it'd also be the 3rd most expensive with the 3rd highest violent crime rate. And the political crime is even worse, with a corruption index 6 times Louisiana's. Number 40. Alaska. Even if Alaska was cheap and safe, you couldn't pay most people to live here. But the state literally does pay people to live here, which I guess convinces the 733,000 Alaskans to overlook the 3rd highest crime rate, 5th highest cost of living, and dark, frigid, cold 8-month-long winters. Well, and the fact that it contains more protected wilderness than every other state combined. Number 39. Michigan. The state which once built 60% of the world's cars, ironically now destroys them with potholes the size of meteor craters. But apart from that and Detroit, where the violent crime rate is 5 times the national average, the rest of the state isn't terrible. It's mostly safe and affordable, and the Upper Peninsula is our nation's best kept secret. Number 38. Illinois. Nearly every Illinoisan is annoyed with their state, with just 19% having a favorable view and 47% wanting to leave. But while taxes are high and Chicago is the country's most corrupt city, Illinois isn't nearly as awful as most Illinoisans think. Incomes are above average, the cost of living is below average, and the K-12 schools are the 5th best in the nation. Number 37. Missouri. It's ironic that St. Louis could have been Chicago, and Missouri could have been Illinois if not for their adamantness of remaining a riverboat city once the railroads came. And although, for the past 150 years, that seemed like a huge mistake, guess who's having the last laugh now? Because while Illinois is heading in all the wrong directions, Missouri is improving in all the right ones. It's dirt cheap, not nearly as dangerous as it used to be, and Kansas City is one of our nation's most underrated cities. Number 36. Nevada. Although every state claims the traffic cone is their state flower, I've been to every state, and nowhere are they more ubiquitous than Nevada. Despite hardly ever getting snow, Las Vegas routinely reduces a 3 or 4 lane perfectly good condition road down to 1 lane, choking traffic to a crawl, before tearing up and repaving said road a few weeks later, even though it was just paved a month ago. And the rampant corruption in Nevada's construction industry translates to every part of the state, with the highest unemployment and terrible schools, healthcare, and air and water quality. Number 35. Arizona. With its average street looking like this, Nevada comes close. But no state exemplifies the quintessential American beige suburban sprawl like Arizona. So it's no surprise everyone drives everywhere, and Arizonans are the second least physically active residents, especially since it's even hotter than Nevada. The economy's better, however, and for the few Arizonans who actually do go outside, the 24 national parks and monuments are mesmerizing. Number 34. Indiana. Unless you're a huge racing fan, the only reason you'd ever think of Indiana is if you ended up here accidentally. And even in that situation, which actually happens more often than you'd expect considering more interstates intersect in Indiana than any other state, you still probably wouldn't think much of the place until you start coughing from the nation's second worst pollution. And while for most places I'd say that's a shame, as someone who has driven nearly 1,000 miles in the state, you're not missing out on much. Number 33. Texas. At the rate Texas is growing, it's projected to be the most populous state within 20 years. But this is also creating its fair share of problems, with crime, schools, pollution, poverty, and healthcare access all ranking among the bottom 12 states. And yes, Austin and Dallas offer booming, diverse economies, but considering they're no longer affordable, Texans are now the second most overworked Americans. Number 32. California. More Californians move to Texas than any other state. And yes, their concerns about traffic, homelessness, and the rapidly increasing cost of living are real. But for 39 million people, the beautiful weather and scenery, longest life expectancy, and exceptional economy are good enough reasons to stay. Number 31. Ohio. Despite being one of the most important states during the 19th and early 20th centuries, today, Ohio is often forgotten as flyover country. But because it's flown under the radar, it's quietly turned into the best bang for your buck state that isn't boring. It's dirt cheap, Cincinnati and Cleveland are steeped with history and culture, and Columbus's thriving job market is one of the fastest growing. Number 30. Georgia. While Atlanta's diverse, fast-growing economy single-handedly makes Georgia one of the best states to do business, it's not a great state to work in, with below-average wages, terrible healthcare, and the second-worst workplace protections. Number 29. Delaware. Delaware is so average, it almost seems made up. No, like I can't make this up. Its education, economy, infrastructure, affordability, and crime all rank between 22nd and 30th place. Luckily, they can call themselves the first state, because otherwise, what would they put on their license plates? The Small Wonder? Again, I'm not making this up. That's an actual nickname. Number 28. Kansas. If Delaware is boring, Kansas is boring. I mean, at least there's beaches in Delaware. All Kansas has is tornadoes and the less cool Kansas City. Heck, the most famous Kansan is a fictional character. But it's also fitting that it's the geographic center of the US, because it's also the center of our list, somehow being even more average than the Small Wonder. Number 27, New York. Love it or hate it, there is no place like New York. And while many love to hate it, apart from being expensive, most criticisms just aren't true. Crime is below the national average, the public schools and healthcare are stellar, and from quaint, charming towns to unspoiled, stunning scenery to the largest US city, New York has something for everyone. Number 26. Pennsylvania. A lot of people forget this, but Philadelphia was once larger and more prominent than New York City, and it not caring about remaining number one is kind of indicative of the city at large. It is what it is. One of the most historic, authentic big cities that's a fraction of the cost of most big cities. Now, of course, part of the reason it's so cheap is the high crime, rampant drug addiction, and terrible stench of sewage in its streets, but that's also part of its authenticity. And although the rest of the state has little economic opportunity, it does possess one of the best healthcare systems and plenty of cute, affordable towns, which is why it was just ranked the best state to retire in. Number 25. Montana. Statistically, Montana should be about 10 spots lower. It's got the worst internet. The median salary is 10 grand less than the national average, while the median home price is 100 grand more. And although it's not as cold or dark as Alaska, it's still pretty darn cold and dark, which is likely why it has the highest suicide rate. But the western half is breathtaking, and more Montanans think their state is the best than any other state's residents. So that has to count for something, right? Number 24. Oregon. The media often portrays Portland like some lawless war zone, but while homelessness is a serious issue, statistically, it's actually much safer than most cities its size. The real problem is the state's terrible education system. At least the infrastructure and economy are excellent, however, with the second largest income growth despite Oregonians working the fourth least hours. Oh, and every inch of the Pacific Northwest gem is gorgeous. Number 23. North Carolina. Outside of Raleigh and Charlotte, North Carolina has one of the worst economies. And when factoring in wages, unemployment benefits, workplace protections, and the cost of living, it's the worst state for workers. With no vacation, sick, or parental leave required by law, no required breaks or maximum work hour laws, and the state government actually prohibiting local governments from increasing their minimum wage. But it's a nature lover's paradise, and Raleigh's economy is so good that it alone lifts the state out of mediocrity. Number 22. North Dakota. Even the most prideful North Dakotan will tell you, the only thing that makes North Dakota relevant is how gosh dang irrelevant it is. I mean, there's a reason they drink way more than any other state and have the most DUIs per capita. But with good incomes, a cheap cost of living, and the second best unemployment rate and roads, despite being the coldest state that routinely gets blanketed by blizzards so big they leave snowdrifts you can ski down, life here may be boring, but it ain't bad. Number 21. Rhode Island. More Rhode Islanders claim their scenic seaside state to be the worst than any other state's residents, despite it offering the second best healthcare, sixth lowest crime rate, and easy access to world-class cities. But that's mostly just due to Rhode Islanders rarely ever leaving New England, so their only reference points are some of the best states in the nation. Or maybe they're just frustrated with the state of the state's roads, which somehow managed to be the worst in the nation despite the state being so small there are literally only 8 roads. Number 20. South Dakota. While North Carolina's the better Carolina, South Dakota's the better Dakota. Not only is it much more scenic, with the Black Hills, Badlands, and 6 trees instead of 2, South Dakota also leads the nation in renewable energy, has one of the most stable job markets, and with cheap housing and no state income tax, there's little to stress about. Number 19. Virginia. With beaches, mountains, and mountains of history, as well as the 11th best schools, 10th best incomes, and 7th lowest crime rate, Virginia's a jack of all trades. So it's a shame its lack of a signature identity or city makes most people gloss over it as just a glorified DC suburb. Number 18. Florida. While Virginia's a virgin that housed our nation's oldest village, Floridians are older and the villages go harder. I mean, it's the STD capital. And although Florida used to just be a sprawling nursing home with beautiful beaches and bingo nights, it's quickly turning into a place for everyone. With the 4th fastest growing economy, the best universities, and bustling hip cities. Salaries are still $8,000 below the US median, however, and housing costs are now laughably expensive, with the average homeowner's insurance being 4 times the national average. Number 17. Maine. If Florida's an assisted living facility, Maine is a cemetery. Because despite being the 3rd coldest state, it's by far the oldest state with a median age over 45. But that's also probably why it's the safest state, and with plenty of trees, moose, and picturesque small towns, it's basically the mom and pop store version of Canada. Number 16. Iowa. Once every 4 years, presidential hopefuls wave pork chops on a stick, thinking it'll morph them into average Joes and win over Iowan voters. But just watch. After these caucuses, they'll ditch Iowans quicker than you ditch your New Year's resolution. Iowans don't mind, however, because with low crime, the second best income to cost of living ratio, and some of the friendliest folk, Iowa's like its many scarecrows. Outstanding in all fields. Number 15. Connecticut. Connecticut connects Massachusetts and New York, 2 of the wealthiest states. So it shouldn't be a surprise that it too is wealthy, with the 8th highest salaries and 8th lowest poverty rate. And yes, Hartford is no Boston or New York, but Connecticut is still the 8th safest state, with the 5th best healthcare, 3rd best schools, and cheapest home prices in New England. Which is why it actually had the highest percentage of inbound moves of any state last year. Number 14. New Jersey. If Connecticut is a great place to raise a family, New Jersey's the mecca of raising families. The crime and divorce rates are the 3rd lowest of any state, the incomes are the 2nd best, and if you ever want big city amenities, you're just a field trip away. And speaking of field trips, your kids will likely go on a lot of them, because New Jersey's public schools are the 2nd best in the nation. Number 13. Wisconsin. While most people Netflix and chill, Wisconsinites dairy and chill. Well, actually more like dairy and beer, because Wisconsin holds 7 of the 10 heaviest drinking cities. But if you aren't lactose intolerant or celiac, there's not much to complain about. It's remarkably safe and affordable, and the schools and healthcare are top-notch. Number 12. Colorado. Colorado used to always be one of the 10 best states, and for a while, it was even top 5. But although the stellar economy and schools, historically low poverty, and enchanting scenery were enough to overlook its one Achilles heel in the past, that heel is now an amputated leg because the violent crime rate is the 6th worst in the nation. Number 11. Wyoming. Now that people know Wyoming actually exists, it might turn into the next Colorado. Okay, obviously I'm kidding, it's like a total of 18 people live here. But for those 18 people, life is pretty great. Number 10. Vermont. Vermont is small. Heck, if it weren't for Wyoming, it'd be the least populous state. But Vermonters like it that way, since it keeps things local. And since Vermonters basically only shop local, unemployment's low and wages are great, despite them working the second least hours of any state. Number 9. Maryland. Whenever people mention Maryland, it's usually just about how awful Baltimore is. But from the highest salaries to the lowest unemployment rate to the second most educated populace, third lowest depression rate, fourth best healthcare quality, and fifth lowest poverty rate, even if Maryland sails under the radar, it's an anchor of success. Number 8. Nebraska. The good life. Need I say more? I really don't, but it's also in the top 11 in every quality of life metric. Number 7. Idaho. As the 5th safest state with more protected national forests than any other state, the gem state truly is a gem. Its only problem the last few years was that it had one of the most unsustainable housing markets. But home costs are now dropping while the economy remains the fastest growing. Number 6. Minnesota. Minnesotans are just so nice, because Minnesota is so darn nice. And even with all that ice, Minnesota manages to have the best roads in the nation, as well as the best income to cost of living ratio. And while usually warm, sunny weather leads to happier, longer lives, despite negative 40 Fahrenheit, Minnesotans are the 4th happiest Americans with the 4th longest life expectancy. Number 5. Washington. Washington possessed the fastest growing economy nearly every year for the past decade. And while it was only the 3rd fastest growing in 2023, that's mostly just indicative of how large it's already grown, with a GDP per capita greater than Switzerland, the 2nd richest country. And with temperate rainforests, rocky coasts, snow-capped volcanoes, and desert canyons, per square mile, Washington is the most climate diverse state. Number 4. Hawaii. Yes, a carton of eggs costs $8, and you're stuck on a small rock 2,500 miles from the mainland. But nearly every Hawaiian resident would tell you the sacrifices are worth it to be able to live the happiest, healthiest, longest lives of any American in one of the safest, most beautiful, and least polluted places. Number 3. Utah. Compared to Hawaii, Utah's cold, but still gosh darn beautiful. And while Hawaiians are the happiest Americans due to the warm weather and laid-back lifestyle, Utahns are the 2nd happiest Americans because they're overachievers. The healthcare quality is the 2nd best, the poverty rate is the 2nd lowest, and despite working the least hours of any state, the economy is the 2nd fastest growing. And no surprise, Utahns volunteer more than any other state's residents. Number 2. New Hampshire. Year after year, New Hampshire is usually the best state to live in. So why is it only number 2? Especially since it's the 2nd safest state with the nation's 5th best schools and salaries? Well, it's not nearly as cheap as it used to be, and most of its good jobs are in our next state anyway. Number 1. Massachusetts. Yes, New Hampshire's more scenic, but from the 4th lowest crime rate to the best healthcare and education systems to the number 1 economy which supports most of New Hampshire's economy, Massachusetts aces every category, which makes sense considering it has the most educated populace. But while its quality of life would put it as the 6th best country on earth, did you know 4 countries in Europe actually have a higher quality of life? If you want to find out which, there's a video on screen now. Go check it out.